Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our next Computer Side Chat. Today we're going to start looking at elections. So we just finished up our unit looking at politics and political parties, and I talked about the fact that that makes up the first of kind of a three-pronged look at politics in the United States. So we're going to move into the second section of that now, that's specifically going to look at elections. And we're going to get into kind of the specific jargon of elections in class throughout the course of this week. But I want to focus on now is introducing this by specifically looking at what is the process to getting elected. So from the time you decide that you want to run for an elected position to actually winning that position, what are all the steps necessary? At the time of this video being recorded, it is officially 2020, which means we are in a presidential election year. And so we are actually in the middle of this process for the presidential election. That said, this process is the same on a smaller level for any elected position, from your local school board to running as a member of Congress up to the President of the United States. So let's go ahead and jump right in. So, again, we're going to look at how to run for office, or specifically the steps necessary to win an election. And the essential question for that is, in your own words, what does the road to winning an elected position look like? And there are 9 steps that we're going to focus on. So let's start going through those one by one. So our first step is pretty simple. The first step involves announcing your candidacy. So what is this? Basically, this means that you are publicly announcing that you're going to run for a position. Again, that could be school board, that could be for representative in the U.S. House of Representatives, that could be for President of the United States. You are publicly putting out there to people that you are going to run for this position. You could do that a couple different ways. You could go on a news program and announce that. You could do a televised press conference, or you could do a public rally of some kind. Any of these things are fine in terms of announcing your candidacy, and you will see people for various elected positions announce their candidacy in this way. The entire idea is trying to get attention publicly to make people aware of the fact that you want to run for this position. So after you announce your candidacy, what's next? The second thing is to form a campaign organization. And simply, campaigns are not won by individual candidates. There is a very complex machine behind them that is specifically geared towards helping them perform to the best of their ability and win elections. Now again, depending on the size of office that you are running for, these organizations will be smaller or larger. If you are running for a local office, then it's probably just going to be a handful of people helping you plan out your strategy, putting up flyers, maybe doing some minor fundraising, all the way up to the President of the United States, who is going to have a very intricate, very large nationwide organization. So what is the purpose of this organization? Well, this is largely volunteers, strategists, and consultants and pollsters who all are trying to form an overall plan to help their candidate win. So in the bottom left corner, you can see, I'm not necessarily going to go through this, but you can see kind of a list of what are some of the positions within that campaign organization. From a campaign manager who kind of sets the overall agenda and strategy of the campaign, more on that in a second, all the way down to your people that canvass or phone bank, trying to make people aware of the candidate, or people that collect voter data, and so on and so forth. So again, these can be really large operations containing hundreds, if not thousands of people. Next is raise funds, and this is actually something that eventually we're going to take some time to look at in depth. Because this is very, very big in terms of campaigning, and there's a lot of parts of it that are very controversial. Very simply, campaigns aren't free. If you are going to win a campaign, you have to raise funds. So this entire step revolves around trying to generate money and trying to get as much money as possible to help run your campaign. Whether that's to pay people to work for you, whether that is to put out advertisements to make people aware of you, whatever that may be. Fundraising can be done in a lot of different ways. It can be done in phone banking. In other words, calling voters and asking them if they would be interested in contributing money to the candidate that you are working for. They can be really high-dollar fundraisers where the candidate comes in and attends a dinner with individuals that are willing to pay for a seat in that fundraiser. There are a lot of other ways that fundraising can be done. Again, that is something that we're going to get more in depth into later in this unit. Here in front of you, again, this is being recorded in January of 2020. You can see kind of the most recent data for fundraising in the current presidential race. You can see who has raised how much and how they have raised that. That bottom graph, again, will make a little bit more sense down the road. But again, fundraising is simply just raising funds so that you can pay for your campaign, hire people, put out advertisements, and pay for the things necessary for you to win your election. 4, develop a campaign strategy. And so this goes back to that campaign organization. So what does this involve, or what is this? Well, this involves a lot of questions. Who are you trying to appeal to? What are the issues that you are going to focus on? How are you going to get in touch with voters who agree with you and try to encourage them to come out and vote? So in other words, this entire strategy revolves around how can I get the most people possible out to vote for me so that I can win my election? Number 5, run in primaries and caucuses. Now, again, I've said this a few times now, but again, this is being recorded in January of 2020, and so we are in a presidential election year. This is the step that we are currently in. So let me first talk about what primaries and caucuses are before I explain what this step looks like. Think of primaries and caucuses as the election before the election. So primaries and caucuses are held in February, March, April, and May. The general election where we actually vote people into office is held in November. So these primary and caucuses, their purpose is so that members of a given political party can choose who they want to represent them or who they want to be the party's nominee for a given position. So in other words, the Democratic Party can only nominate one person to run for the Democratic Party for the office of the presidency. But at the start of this process, I believe it was 26 individuals threw their hat into the ring wanting to run for that Democratic nomination. The primaries and caucuses are where people, specifically Democrats across all 50 states, will vote for which of those candidates they like best. So the Democratic Party can figure out who is their one individual who would be the most likely to win in November. And so in other words, this is the process by which the party figures out who they will nominate for an elected office. So, like I said, we are currently in the midst of that for the 2020 presidential election, and that first primary or caucus is going to be in Iowa in the beginning of February, and that's going to be our first look at which Democratic candidate is going to most likely be the Democratic nominee in November. What is the difference between a primary? What is the difference between a caucus? Again, that's more stuff we're going to get into this week. I really just kind of want to get into the basics and go over the general, what is this stuff and what is happening at each step. So we'll come back to this and spend quite a bit of time with this. Step 6, attend the party convention. So this generally rolls around in the summer. So generally around July, a couple of months before the election in November. So this is where the political party officially announces its nominees for elected offices based on the results of the caucuses and primaries. In other words, if you make it to this part, congratulations. You have won your party's nomination. So let's say that you're running for the presidency. This means you beat out all the other competitors. The party has chosen you as the nominee, and you're going to be the one on the ballot in November trying to actually win that office. And so this is where that nomination is officially announced, where that person accepts the nomination, and from July to November, that individual now has to figure out a way to actually win against their opponent from the other party. And that brings us to building a coalition of supporters. So in other words, when your campaign first started out, you were largely looking to appeal to people that thought like you. In other words, if you were running for a nomination within the Democratic Party, you were trying to appeal to Democrats. Well, now that you've won the nomination and you're going to be the nominee in November, you need more than just Democrats to vote for you. You need people outside of your party that are willing to cast a vote for you in November to give you a chance to win. So what does building a coalition of supporters involve? Well, your strategy might change. In other words, who are you going to appeal to and how are you going to appeal to them? How you market yourself might change. What worked for voters in the Democratic Party or voters in the Republican Party might not work for independent voters. And then lastly, you might choose to focus on other issues more predominantly at this point. In other words, there might be an issue that's really important to your party, but might not be that important to voters outside of your party. So in other words, at this step, you're trying to build a coalition or a group of people that is going to give you a majority of votes when November rolls around. Before I move on, you can see kind of down in the bottom left-hand corner here, this is what's known as the Trump Coalition. So in other words, you can see how he performs with various groups here. So at the top, we can see that he performs really well with rural people, and specifically people that are ages 45 to 65 plus. And at the bottom, we can see that he does very poorly with people aged 17 to 29, people that live in cities, people that are women, and so on and so forth. So this gives the Trump campaign an idea of who are they likely to appeal to, and then maybe where do they need to do a better job of appealing to win some votes. All right, second to last step is participate in televised debates. What are these? So televised debates are where you actually get to come face to face with your opponent from the opposing party. The most famous of these debates is obviously presidential debates, where the Democratic nominee and the Republican nominee face off against each other. And so this is your chance on a very big nationally televised stage to be able to go head-to-head against your opponent and try to prove why you are better qualified to win this position over your opponent. And so you can see here pictures from the last two presidential races. In the bottom left, you can see one of the debates between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. In the top right, you can see a debate between Barack Obama and Mitt Romney. We'll talk a little bit about the history of debates in this country. You probably talked about that a little bit in your U.S. history courses. Kind of most famously, debates go back to the race between Richard Nixon and JFK, and that debate was really a big turning point. In other words, that first televised debate between JFK and Richard Nixon, Nixon, to put it bluntly, looked terrible. In other words, he looked very tired, he looked unkempt, he was very... the lights were making him sweat profusely. Meanwhile, JFK looked like a movie star, spoke very well, seemed very articulate, seemed very well put together. In other words, these debates are not just about the issues, it's about your image and how you present yourself. And then lastly, we get to the general election itself. So the primaries and caucuses, like I said, are the election before the election. The general election is the election itself. It's the official term for the election where we vote someone into office. So this is where people across the country are going to go to their polling precinct and vote for whether they want the Democratic candidate, the Republican candidate, or an independent candidate to win a given office like the presidency. And at the end of the day, whoever gets the most votes will win, with the exception of the presidential race. That is based on who gets the most electoral votes. Again, that's something we'll talk about down the road. But this is the last step. If you win here, you officially won that elected office and you'll be sworn in January. If you lose here, that's the end of the road. You will not take that office. And if you choose to run again, then whenever that position comes open again, you've got to go through this whole process again to give you another chance to hopefully win. So like I said, currently we are right in the middle of this with the 2020 presidential election. Obviously, the presidential election is going to be the big focus, but this is also, at this time, the same process is happening for people that want to run for Congress or people that want to run for local or state positions. Tomorrow we'll come in, we'll talk about this, we'll do our quiz, and again, we'll try to move into looking at more of the specifics with regards to the terminology used and the specific things that happen during some of these steps. Have a good night. I'll see you guys.